Until the end of my life, I will remember those who remain under the ground here, bringing to my mind the names of all those whom I had known. I prayed for them, prayed for their peace, and as I prayed, each of their faces appeared clearly before me. The year was 1957. The camp was getting emptier every day. Somewhere nearby, a village sprung up where free people came from all over Russia to work to replace the many prisoners who were now gone. Streets appeared, squares, rows of houses. People came who knew nothing of the existence of our special camp and of the boggy, swampy graveyard where so many people were buried. The past was being lost to the memory of people. May their memory be eternal. The end of 1957 was nearing. Father Arseny had 6 more years before the end of his term because in 1952 his sentence had been lengthened by 10 years. He was called in by the administration several times. They called him in, they interrogated him, they wrote protocols, filled out forms, asked for instructions from somewhere, and finally, in the spring of 1958, Father Arseny was told that he was freed because of the general amnesty. He was told this now, in spite of the fact that all the other prisoners concerned had been freed due to the same amnesty several years earlier. They informed him of this casually, as if Father Arseny was being told that he had a parcel from somebody, and not that he had been in camp for the past many, many years without any reason. Only one person, a member of the responsible commission, said, "Look at that, the old man is still alive, so we have to free him." So they dressed him, gave him travel papers, the money he had earned for these latter years, a document allowing him to receive identity papers when he would arrive at his destination. His destination? Where was it now for Father Arseny? They asked him where he was going when they gave him the travel papers. Father Arseny named an old little village near Yaroslavl, where a long time ago he had gone frequently, living there at times while studying antiquity. He was not used to freedom anymore. He could not imagine life outside the camp, and at this point it made almost no difference to him where he was going. Exhaustion, unfathomable tiredness weighed heavily on him. Everything is in the hands of God, he decided. God will take care of everything. He needed to rest, to gather his strength to be alone and find peace and oneness within himself in prayer, and only then would he be able to see his spiritual children again. At this time he had no strength left. Only prayer sustained him. With a bag full of his meagre belongings and new shoes, black pants and a new padded cotton jacket and a typical hat with ear flaps, Father Arseny walked out of the gates of the camp. A warm, joyous spring wind blew, tussling his hair, adding a special life to the morning, lightly carrying the dust of the road. Having passed by the sentries, he turned his face towards the camp, bowed deeply, and blessed it with a sign of the cross. The guards watched him with surprise. A very old man was leaving, an old man who had lived here for so many years. He walked away from the camp, went up a hill on the road, turned again towards the camp and looked it over. The sight was miserable. The few towers and the barbed wires encircling the barracks were all that was left. Beyond the barbed wires you could see piles of bricks, half-burned barracks, posts fallen to the ground, and half-rotten remains of guard towers. Father Arseny remembered this special camp, when it was full, when it was enormous, and so many people were living there in their terrible, painful life. Father Arseny stepped off the road and prayed, remembering the many, many people who had died here, and also those God had brought to freedom. Many tormented years had passed since Father Arseny had first come here, very long years, but God had never left him, and had saved Father Arseny, giving him the possibility to see so much beauty in this sea of sorrow. He found here people who showed him everything a true Christian soul should search for and work towards. Here, surrounded by human suffering and sorrow, he had learned to pray silently, surrounded by people. Here, the example of so many righteous people, or very ordinary people, had taught him that he must take on himself the sufferings of others and carry them. and that this is the law of Christ. Praying, Father Arseny thanked God, the Mother of God, and all those who had lived here and had helped and taught him. A truck gave Father Arseny a lift to the civilian village nearby, where the supervisor they had called the Fair One now worked as a regular employee. It was easy to find his house. The whole atmosphere of the civilian village was difficult to get used to, though. There was no screaming, no criminals, no schedule of the day, no swearing. The Fair One, now called Andrei Ivanovich, together with his wife, accompanied Father Arseny to the train station. The 2 days Father Arseny had spent with Andrei Ivanovich had given him the chance to truly believe that he was free. The Fair One paid a supplement to the ticket Father Arseny had so that he could travel in more comfort. Father Arseny was given the lower bunk. He put his bag under his head, lay down, and closed his eyes. The train clanked on each rail joint. The wheels knocked regularly outside. The windows passed the taiga, the rocks, the rivers, the lakes of Siberia. Before his closed eyes appeared people and more people in a continuous file. Most had died, but some had survived, and Father Arseny would see them. His new life appeared nebulous for him. Nothing was known to him, but there was God, and with his help this new life had to start somehow. His distracting thoughts stopped, and Father Arseny started to pray. Suddenly he heard, "We'd better watch it. There's someone here from a camp. He could rob us." And another voice answered in a whisper, "I can't understand why they free them. They should all be shot to death." Father Arseny opened his eyes and saw opposite him a young couple. The train was moving. They passed stations, rivers, cities. On the platforms, people walked and talked freely. Life was being lived. Father Arseny prayed for his newly starting life, and for all those who had stayed in camp forever. Spring was more and more evident as they headed further south. Closer to Moscow, everything was blooming with many colours. The terrible past, connected with the special camp, had disappeared, never to be lived again. The era of awful suffering that had been imposed on Russia had come to an end. Looking through the window, not seeing anything, Father Arseny prayed and thanked God and his mother and all the saints for the mercy and help he had received, and asked for help for all those he knew and loved. The train was nearing the city where Father Arseny was to start his new life and continue to serve God and his mankind. Part 2, the path. The train stopped and Father Arseny stepped out of it. It was the spring of 1958, a passionate, happy, cheerful spring. The morning was bright and clear. On the ground were still patches of unmelted snow, and blue, shiny puddles reflected the spring sky. Father Arseny pulled out of the pocket of his jacket a note with an address on it and went to look for the house of Nadezhda Petrovna. Everything felt unfamiliar to him, the people, what they said, what they talked about, their behaviour, and the little town itself, the little town he had once known so well, visited often and even lived in for long stretches of time. Monastery Street, River Street, and so on were now Engels Street, Marat Street, Soviet Street, Lenin Street. Father Arseny walked all over the town asking for instructions as he went, and finally the street he was looking for appeared in front of his eyes at the top of a hill. He found the house, came to the gate, pulled the bell and waited. He rang several times, but although he heard the tinkling of the bell inside the house, nobody came out. Father Arseny looked around helplessly. He did not know what to do. It was getting cold. He was tired from his travelling. His emotions, his uncertainty about his future. He felt lost. He was overwhelmed. He was so used to the strict routine in camp. He was suddenly faced with the bustle of freedom. All this made him lose his concentration and his peace. Standing here in front of the closed gate, Father Arseny felt lost. Where could he go? What could he do? He did not know anybody in this town. He did not have a second address. He did have a second address, but he was unable to find it even after he had searched all his pockets. It was critical that he find a human being who could help him find a room to rent. He had to rest. He had to live alone for a little while in order to understand his new life and to get into this free life he was not used to anymore after all these years. Only then would he be able to write to his spiritual children and friends. What could he do? Perhaps Nadezhda Petrovna did not live here anymore. Next to the fence was a bench. Father Arseny wiped it with his mitten and sat down on it, exhausted. I started thinking, said Father Arseny later, I understood that I had succumbed to pride. I'd thought I could manage my new life by myself without my spiritual children and without my friends. I thought I would get used to this life, but God showed me otherwise. He showed me my mistake. Everything that surrounded me was frightening, was an unknown to me, was foreign. My only hope was in God. Not many passers-by walked along this narrow street. The old bent-over man with the patched-up cotton jacket and his bag of clothes was sitting on a little bench, his back to the fence and looking as if he was daydreaming. The little town, the street had fallen away from him. Only his prayer to God and his mother was present to him. Father Arseny asked to be forgiven for his pride, for his insufficient faith in the help of his own people. Time passed. About 3 hours later, a woman stepped out of the neighbouring house and asked, "What are you waiting for, citizen?" Father Arseny looked at her in amazement and suddenly saw himself on this little bench in an unknown street, faced by this unknown woman. When he realized where he was, he dug the note out of his pocket and answered, "I'm waiting for Nadezhda Petrovna," but the question still came thick and fast. "Who? Where from? Why? Have you been in this town for a long time?" Father Arseny answered evasively, "I'm a friend. I've come to visit her since I haven't seen her for a long time." It seemed impossible to stop the nosy questions. But just then a woman arrived and Father Arseny understood that she must be Nadezhda Petrovna. This is how Father Arseny came to this little town, and this is how he met the very Nadezhda Petrovna in whose house he was to spend the 15 last years of his life. Nadezhda Petrovna's story was an unusual one. A teacher's daughter, at age 16 she joined the Communist Party. She took part in the revolution, became active in the administration of the party, completed the Institute of Red Professors, and started working on the so-called ideological front. Her articles, brochures and books became famous. She worked with noted communists and was elected as a delegate to several meetings, but in 1937 she was suddenly arrested, sent to a camp, and was set free only in 1955 at age 55. Out of her 3 children, only her daughter Maria was still alive. When Nadezhda Petrovna was let out of camp, Maria had already been married for a long time to an army doctor. After her son Yuri had spent a number of years in an orphanage, he was mobilized into the army and killed at age 19. Her youngest son Sergei died in this town's orphanage. Nadezhda Petrovna did not want to live in Moscow and decided to remain in the small town where her little Sergei was buried. Her convictions, love, interest in life, her past, everything had been taken from her, erased by interrogations, by humiliations, by her stay in camp. Her soul was full of unending pain. Her daughter and her son-in-law had brought her this small but comfortable house with its pleasant little garden. In 1952, Father Arseny had met the husband of Nadezhda Petrovna in camp. His name was Pavel. Pavel was very seriously ill, but had worked until the end in very difficult conditions. Pavel became Father Arseny's friend and had asked him, if he ever got free, to find his wife and to tell her about him. He also asked Father Arseny to help Nadezhda Petrovna in any way he could. At the end of 1958, while still in the camp, Father Arseny wrote to some of his friends asking them to find Nadezhda Petrovna. They found her with great difficulty. She was then already living in the same little house where Father Arseny later found her. He wrote her a long and detailed letter telling her everything he knew about Pavel, about his camp life and his last days. She answered and offered to let Father Arseny stay with her when he was released from the camp. Nadezhda Petrovna welcomed Father Arseny. He would be able to tell her about the life of her husband, his stoical behaviour, the thoughts he had expressed before dying. Father Arseny told her a great deal. She listened, sometimes in tears, sometimes in anger, repeating the same sentence again and again. What a man he was, my Pavel, what a man. They destroyed him. They planned his destruction, the bastards. Father Arseny stayed with her for several days, but felt that to remain there would be difficult for him because everything felt foreign to him. He felt shy when he prayed. He felt like a guest, despite having his own room. Meanwhile, he had found the second address in one of his pockets. He thanked Nadezhda Petrovna and took himself to Maria Sergeyevna. Who was a long-time acquaintance and a spiritual daughter from Moscow. About 10 days later, I went to pay a call on Father Arseny, said Nadezhda Petrovna, and what do I see? The house is old and decrepit. Father Arseny is living in a room as small as a closet and sleeping on a broken folding cot under a threadbare blanket. Maria Sergeyevna is so old that she can give Father Arseny no help and needs care herself. In other words, the lame leading the blind. I began begging him to move back to my house. He looked at me humbly and said, "Do you really think this is possible? You know that I'm a priest. I pray for long times at a stretch, and I hold church services at home. You do not believe in God. You are an atheist. Besides, friends of mine will be visiting me, and not just a few. Many will be coming. I wouldn't be a good lodger for you." I could see, wrote Nadezhda Petrovna, that Maria Sergeyevna was also disapproved of him moving back to my house, but for a reason I could not understand. I felt enormous pity for him, so I came back the next day and took him back to my house. I gave Father Arseny a large room with windows looking onto the garden. It is quiet and peaceful here, and I started taking care of him. You see, I live alone. My daughter and her husband visit from Moscow at best once a month, and my granddaughter can come only during her winter vacation. I have too much free time. I read a lot, so this would be something to keep me busy. And I also saw that he was an interesting person, someone special. At first, I couldn't figure out what was so special about him. He prayed all day long, all evening, at night, and then again in the morning. He brought a little icon back from Maria Sergeyevna, hung it in the corner, lit an oil lamp, and kept it burning all the time. All this seemed strange to me. I couldn't understand it. I thought he was uneducated, perhaps a fanatic whose mind had been scarred by the hardship of camp. But then after I talked to him, I realized he was not only very intelligent, but also highly educated. I began watching him closely. Sometimes we had long talks, and I would see before me a man of enormous knowledge, enormous culture. On top of all this, there was something very special about him. He was highly spiritual and had such a heart as I had never seen before. It took me about a month and a half to come to these conclusions. Looking at Father Arseny, I noticed he was still unused to freedom and that life in the camp still haunted him in all its frightening aspects. He did tell me that people would be coming to see him, but nobody did, not even once. He also received no letters, nor did he write any. I later discovered that he had asked Maria Sergeyevna not to tell anyone of his whereabouts.